What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Bush coming at you solo today, talking about coaching changes. We all know coaching affects fantasy football. Well, we're going to get in, break down every single coaching change that happened this offseason. We're going to start with the AFC. I'm going to be doing that tomorrow. Danny is going to come at you guys with the NFC. If you guys enjoy this video at any point, I encourage you to go down and like the video. It helps us out tremendously. Comment any of your thoughts down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. We're going to hit the intro and then we're going to get into the first coaching change. On the AFC side of things, as I mentioned, we're going to be doing the AFC coaching changes today in this video. Within the AFC, there was 4 major coaching changes, and then there was a number of, smaller promotions and tweaks, but the majority of this video is going to focus on the Jaguars coaching change, the Chargers, the Jets, and the Titans, because those were the big 4 within the AFC. Danny, as I mentioned, will go through the NFC ones and focus more on the bigger ones in that conference as well. With each of these bigger coaching changes, I'm going to quickly delve into the background of who the coach is, their philosophy, some history about them, and then what they've done to shape some of their new rosters that they're taking over. And finally, I'll get into some schematic tendencies that we know from previous coaching stops that they've been in. With the smaller ones, I'm going to discuss them more in comparison to previous years and go over a quick overview of them. I'm not necessarily going to get into too much schematic details for each of those because they were more so promotions and maybe certain current head coaches calling plays and stuff like that. So starting with the Jacksonville Jaguars, we've already talked about it at kind of nauseum, to be honest, but I'm going to go into this really, really deep. So Urban Meyer hired as the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Darrell Bevell hired as his offensive coordinator and run game coordinator, with Brian Schottenheimer hired as the pass game coordinator. So with Urban Meyer, quick background for those of you guys that are new to football. Maybe you don't watch college football. You know nothing about Urban Meyer. I know we have some international listeners as well, so maybe you guys have no idea who Urban Meyer is. From a strict wins and losses perspective, 187-32 is one of the best college football win-loss records for a coach in college football history, to be honest. So Urban Meyer, coming from college football, is one of the most successful college football coaches of the past, 30 years or so. And he had 2 major stops in college football. Most recently, Urban Meyer was the head coach of the Ohio State Buckeyes, and basically from 2012 to 2018, before stepping down due to health concerns following a rough season where one of his assistants was actually accused of spousal abuse, and reportedly Urban Meyer covered it up and concealed that. Before that, he was the head coach of the infamous Florida Gators team that won 2 national titles, 2005 to 2010. That came with a litany of success, obviously, with guys like Tim Tebow on that team. At Florida, he was also accused of developing a circle of trust where he favored star players or players that he liked, which people called basically led to a toxic culture, which caused the Sporting News to publish a 3-month investigation called How Urban Meyer Broke Florida Football after he was fired. And then, eventually he moved on to Ohio State, as I mentioned. He also had stops in Utah and Bowling Green as well. So a well-decorated college coach, but a bit of a checkered past in terms of, how he built his culture, how he built his teams. But from a philosophy standpoint, much like what we saw with Matt Rule last year, who was a college coach, a program builder, as they called him, coming from college to the NFL, Matt Rule came into the NFL and all he talked about was speed. That's all he talked about. That's pretty much all we've heard from Urban Meyer as well. I don't know what it is with these college coaches and speed, but supposedly he spent a lot of time preparing for the transition to the NFL. Maybe he knew he was going to go to the NFL after coming out of his 2018 season with Ohio State when Ryan Day took over. Urban Meyer, as I mentioned, is a program builder. So it's no surprise that a team with the #1 overall pick, who finished 1-15 the previous year, was an attractive job for him, for someone like him coming from Utah, where he built a program there and he eventually had a #1 overall pick quarterback at Alex Smith. He came from a program where he built Florida into a successful franchise for the first time in a number of years. And same with Ohio State. They sustained success from the entire time Urban Meyer was there. So much like Matt Rule, all he's done is talk about speed. We had an interview talking about Jacksonville Jaguars' newly acquired head coach. Said it's not necessarily about how fast a player runs, but it's about how fast a player plays. There's a difference. My vision, my dream is always to be the fastest team on the field, whether it's actual speed, which we've seen some additions, and I'll get to that in a second, talking about actual speed, or some actual just decisiveness. They play fast, they play physical, they play smart type of coach. We've heard that emphasis from Urban Meyer and college coaches in the past. So they showed that through their draft, they added speed, right? We can go to the obvious one in Travis Etienne, who's the first round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars, the second first round pick after his teammate Trevor Lawrence. Travis Etienne was the fastest running back in this class, the fastest good running back at least. And in the second round, in the third round, they took Tyson Campbell, who ran in the 4.3s as a cornerback from Georgia, and Andre Cisco, another defensive back who ran in the 4.3. So it's no shock why any of these guys were picked. They are all fast. They all play fast. And it's not a shock that Urban Meyer wanted to upgrade over James Robinson, who's a 4.6 running back. And he also discussed playing fast versus being fast. And one of the biggest reasons that I love Travis Etienne and why he was my running back one was that decisiveness factor in every facet of his game, along with his actual speed and athleticism that he brought to the table. He was just a guy that played fast, whether he was protecting, going out on a route, whatever the case was. He was just a very decisive player. So that's enough about philosophy, enough about his background. Let's get into some schematics with Urban Meyer. So when we talk about the schematics, and I've brought this up before, in 2018, he had Dwayne Haskins at Ohio State, right? And that was the first time that we really saw Urban Meyer use a good college quarterback, because even though Dwayne Haskins didn't work out in the NFL, he was a very good college quarterback. And he recorded 444 out of 583 dropbacks from 11 personnel, which means 3 wide receivers on the field, and only 6 dropbacks where he wasn't in a shotgun formation, meaning he wasn't under center taking the snap. He was back, clapping his hands and catching the ball and getting it out to his playmakers. Only 21 dropbacks from 12 personnel, which is 2 or more tight ends on the field. And the Jaguars signing Marvin Jones and being in on some of these free agents like Kenny Golladay, potentially Juju Smith-Schuster as well, potentially wanting to draft Kadarius Toney at the end of the first round, which tells me that it's going to be an 11 personnel system again in Jacksonville. And as I mentioned, and as we mentioned on the quarterbacks video, dynasty quarterback rankings, rookie quarterback rankings, and rookie running back rankings, this fits very well with what Clemson did as well. So you have Travis Etienne and Trevor Lawrence coming in, as we discussed in both of those videos. Heavy 11 personnel scheme, not a lot of tight ends, evidenced by the fact that the Jaguars passed on a guy like Pat Freiermuth in the second round. They passed on Hunter Long in the third round, and they went for some other needs because Urban Meyer's system doesn't use tight ends very often. When was the last time a good Ohio State tight end came out of Urban Meyer's system? Not very often. It's usually because he has those guys blocking. They're not necessarily guys that are going to be running routes and creating a lot of plays after the catch or anything like that. So tight ends are normally a position that is ignored in Urban Meyer's offense. It runs through the wide receivers. It runs through the running backs. It's a spread offense, and it makes sense why Urban Meyer would want speed in a spread offense, because when you look at the playmakers he's had in the past, he's had guys like Percy Harvin and Curtis Samuel and Paris Campbell and things of that nature. And he's talked about using Travis Etienne in this role by all accounts. And I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't just use Laviska Shenault in this manner, because he was tailor-made for a role like this. And I think everybody be freaking out if everything that's been said about Travis Etienne so far from training camp and from OTAs and from offseason programs and stuff like that have been said about Laviska Shenault. Everybody be freaking out. Laviska Shenault's ADP would be in the 6th round, and we'd be talking about him as a guy who's potentially going to break out this year. But people are pretending like this is a bad thing for Travis Etienne, right? A guy being used in the passing game as a running back, used in a variety of ways. We heard the exact same quote about Najee Harris like 2 minutes before this Travis Etienne stuff came out, talking about how Najee Harris was going to be used as an X receiver and things of that nature. And then it comes out about Travis Etienne, and all of a sudden it's a bad thing. Like, to me, I just don't think that makes any sense. I think it's a good thing that he's going to be used in a variety of ways out of the backfield in the passing game, split out wide, because I think Etienne is capable of doing some things of that nature. And when we get into what Darrell Bevell and Brian Schottenheimer bring to the table as offensive coordinators or co-offensive play callers, they both have a history of using workhorse running backs. So you know that if Etienne earns it, if he's the type of player that they can trust with a full workload, they're not just going to force a running back by committee, because that's what they've always done in previous stops. We've seen Darrell Bevell, when he was in Seattle, use Marshawn Lynch as a workhorse because he earned it. We've seen him use Adrian Peterson in his Minnesota Viking days as a workhorse because he earned it. So if Travis Etienne is as talented as I think he can be, as talented as the Jaguars think he can be with that first round draft capital, he's going to get a workhorse role. And you better believe that. I know James Robinson stands are wild and rampant, but you got to look at what a team does, not what they say. So in my opinion, this thing's either going to work or it's not. This Urban Meyer experiment could be the classic case of a washed up college coach in way over his head in the NFL. And to be honest, that's the way I'm leaning. I don't think this is going to work out to tremendous success for the Jacksonville Jaguars. But, they have the right arm of Trevor Lawrence, who's one of the best quarterback prospects we've ever seen. So it's possible that he can carry Urban Meyer into, more success than maybe Urban Meyer is going to demand at the NFL level. Or we could be looking at the same type of program builder that he's been in college, only now he's doing it in the pros, right? He's been successful in college. I'm not taking anything away from what he's done in college. I'm just concerned of how it's going to translate to the professional game. So to the next team, that was a long-winded conversation about Urban Meyer. We're going to talk about the Los Angeles Chargers. Brandon Staley coming in as the former Rams defensive coordinator as their new head coach. And Joe Lombardi, formerly of the New Orleans Saints, formerly of the Detroit Lions, hired as the offensive coordinator. Since Brandon Staley is a defensive-minded head coach, I'll probably keep the background a little bit more brief with him. But he led the number one defense in the NFL last year. That, of course, had some superstar talents, right? They had Jalen Ramsey. They had Aaron Donald. But he also developed some young players as well, including cornerback Darius Williams, safeties Taylor Rapp and John Johnson, and a number of guys up front. So with the talent that the Chargers defense has, they have Joey Bosa, they have Derwin James, they have Chris Harris, obviously, as like the high-end talent. And some of the young guys that they have, Kenneth Murray, Drew Tranquill and Nasir Adderley, Jerry Tillery up front. We could see this unit be transformed very quickly into a top 10 scoring defense. And for a fantasy perspective, that lends itself a lot more to rushing opportunities on offense. It lends itself a lot more to more efficient quarterback play because Justin Herbert isn't going to have to play from behind every single game with a bad defense. So it does contribute to the offense, but it is good knowing that the Chargers should have a better defense than they've had the past couple of years because they have the talent to have a great defense. It's up to Brandon Staley to put that all together, and I think he's capable of doing that. From a schematic standpoint, this is what we care about more, obviously, with the new coaching change. What do we care about for fantasy? It's what Joe Lombardi is going to bring to the table. Most notably for Joe Lombardi, he spent the last number of years, past 15 years or so, with the New Orleans Saints as their quarterbacks coach with a brief intermission in between there as the offensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions in 2014 and 2015. And the last time we saw him as an offensive coordinator, we saw the Detroit Lions in 2014 and 2015 pass the ball at a very, very high rate, leading the NFL in pass percentage with 64% in 2015 and 7th in the NFL in pass percentage in 2014. So despite having a terrible defense, obviously the Lions had a terrible defense back then, and they had Matthew Stafford and Calvin Johnson at the height of their powers. And even in Calvin Johnson's declining years, he was still the focal point of their offense. Their running backs were like Joique Bell and Amir Abdullah. So we're likely to see more of the New Orleans Saints side of things from Joe Lombardi, given that's where most of his experience coaching has come from. Since 2016, no team has thrown more targets to the running back position. And even if you remove the last 2 years where Drew Brees has had a bit of a declining arm in terms of his arm strength, we're still talking about a team that ranked number one at targeting running backs from 2016 to 2018. And they even ranked number 2 in the NFL in 2016, the year before Alvin Kamara was drafted. So this is a team, this is a coach that likes to use his running backs in the passing game. And that's not just a product of Drew Brees. It's a product of how Joe Lombardi calls up plays. It's how Pete Carmichael, who Joe Lombardi has been learning from the past couple of years, has called up plays. And I expect the same type of usage for Austin Eckler and the Los Angeles Chargers. And another thing that's good, that bodes well for Austin Eckler, is that they run the ball in the red zone a ton. They ranked number 2 in the NFL over the past 5 years or so, since 2016, only behind the New England Patriots in total rushing attempts to running backs inside the 10-yard line. So this is a team that in the New Orleans Saints, despite passing the ball quite a bit during that time, as soon as they got down inside the 10-yard line, it was running back time. That was the time that they were running the ball to score points. It's what smart teams do, in my opinion. And I think that Joe Lombardi is going to bring that philosophy over to the Los Angeles Chargers. And that is great news all around for Austin Eckler, because we have a situation where a coaching tendency, which is throwing to the running backs and running the ball in the red zone, meets what you should do as a good coach, which is get your best players the ball and adapt your coaching to the talent around you. Because if Joe Lombardi had went to a situation where they had terrible running backs like Houston or something like that, then it's hard to project that type of situation. But because he has a guy that's very similar to Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler, we can very easily project that type of usage to Austin Eckler in the future. So all around great news for Austin Eckler, especially for his ability to score more touchdowns, because that's been a problem for him the past 2 seasons. And that's really where we could see his ceiling go even higher than it's already been thus far. So for Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen and the rest of the passing game, we have seen Joe Lombardi during his time with the Lions and with the Saints be a very pass-heavy team prior to Drew Brees' decline when they went to more of a run-heavy approach. This offense has a chance to be very good, in my opinion. I really like both of these hires, and I think the top 3 fantasy relevant guys on this team, right? Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Keenan Allen are set to eat big time in this offense. And I think Mike Williams, as I've mentioned before, is a good sleeper. Josh Palmer, a good sleeper for dynasty purposes. I really believe in this offense. I like what they did. Brandon Staley seems like he's going to be a great head coach to me. And Joe Lombardi should be set to, command that offense for years to come. And I think Justin Herbert's going to take a step forward. I think Austin Eckler is going to take a step forward. And I think Keenan Allen's going to be the same guy he's always been. So to me, it's stock up on the Chargers. I really like what they did in as far as their coaching is concerned. And speaking of stock up and what I like, what they're doing as far as their coaching is concerned is the New York Jets, which is the next team that we're going to get into. Robert Saleh was hired as the head coach and Mike Lafleur hired as the offensive coordinator. So we're going to start with Robert Saleh, his background and his situation. I'm sure you guys know this by now, but I absolutely love what the Jets did this past season. And they are the single most improved team to me in the entire NFL because of the dumpster fire that Adam Gase left behind. In fact, the Bills, Packers, Buccaneers, and Titans all scored more than double the amount of points that the Jets scored last year. They scored 243 points, which is like 15.2 points per game. And that's just not going to get it done. So the Jets brass made a change, and they made a good change, in my opinion. Just like with the Chargers, I'm just going to touch on Saleh briefly because offensive coordinator Mike Lafleur is the one that we're actually concerned with as fantasy players. But Saleh's change and ability to adapt the culture from the most undisciplined, unorganized, and unmotivated franchise over the past 2 years and adapt that to more of a winning culture should be the ability that Robert Saleh can bring to the table. By all accounts and my own experience listening to some of the interviews of this guy, he's a coach that players love. We've heard Richard Sherman talk about it on Chris Collinsworth's podcast ad nauseum. It doesn't directly translate to fantasy points per se, but having the right guy at the helm elevates the play of everybody, offense, defense, special teams, whatever the case is. If you have the right head coach, players will want to play for that guy. They'll want to go out and, spill their blood, sweat, and tears for that coach. And we saw that in 2018 with the Miami Dolphins, or 2019 when Brian Flores took over. And this is a very similar situation, in my opinion. You got a defensive-minded head coach, leader of men type. He's going to come in and elevate the play of everybody around him and be the total anti-Adam Gase, who basically did the exact opposite of everything I just said. Robert Saleh came from the 49ers and the Seahawks coaching trees, where he built one of the league's best defenses in 2019 with the San Francisco 49ers. And he even coached up an injury-riddled 2020 49ers defense into a very respectable unit. Anytime you can get great play out of questionable talent, I would consider you a great coach. And from a schematic standpoint, that's enough about Robert Saleh. Let's get to the offense and Mike Lafleur and what he brings to the table. We trust Robert Saleh to lead the team and get the defense up to snuff, running despite, honestly, the defense was pretty good the past few years. But what about the offense? What can we expect from Mike Lafleur and the offense? The first thing that comes to mind with Mike Lafleur is the fact that he was the right-hand man to Kyle Shanahan and the passing game coordinator, and honestly, the de facto offensive coordinator in San Francisco since 2017. Much like Robert Saleh, we've seen Shanahan and Lafleur get the most of less than ideal talent. Last year, the 49ers ranked 12th in passing yards and 21st in scoring, despite George Kittle and Deebo Samuel virtually missing most of the year, if not the whole season, and quarterback Jimmy Garoppolo missing time as well. Despite the other litany of injuries they had on defense, they were able to field a successful offense, an offense that was able to move the ball. And when you consider the rushing ability of the 49ers offenses the past couple of years, they've consistently been a top 10 running back unit over the last few years, despite never having a feature ball carrier during that time. They've never seen a running back top 153 carries in a single season since 2017 when Lafleur and Shanahan got there. This can only bode well for Michael Carter, as the inside and outside zone running scheme that they're going to adopt will match exactly what Michael Carter has done at UNC. About half of his runs, 72 out of 156, came on those type of plays per Sports Info Solution. So I think Michael Carter is in for a great situation. Obviously, we got question marks around how much opportunity he's going to get right away, but from a schematic standpoint, this is a great fit for him. It can only mean good things for him. And again, from a schematic standpoint, this can only mean good things for Zach Wilson, the second overall pick in the 2021 draft. Matt Lafleur's passing offense in San Francisco ranked top 10 in play action and bootleg dropbacks since 2019. And this is despite ranking number 16 in passing attempts this past year with a collection of random quarterbacks. As I mentioned, Jimmy Garoppolo was often injured, and ranking 29th in passing attempts in 2019 with a less mobile Jimmy Garoppolo. And when you look at what Zach Wilson does well, what he did well at BYU, he ranks number 1 in this class on play action, recording a 156.1 quarterback rating, which is near perfect with a 17-0 touchdown to interception ratio this past year. He's a guy that can win on play action. He can get things done on play action. And Zach Wilson ranked number 3 in this class on passer rating on bootleg plays as well. So basically what Mike LaFleur does well as a play caller is also what Zach Wilson does well. And again, when you have coaching tendencies meeting what you should do as an offensive coordinator to get your players in the best position to make plays, that's exactly when you get a good offense. And that's exactly what you're going to see, in my opinion, with Zach Wilson come his rookie season. I think once they figure things out, once he gets adapted to the offense, this is a team that's going to score points, and it's going to be a very fun offense to watch, which is not something you could have said about the Jets for the past few years. And even Chris Herndon and Kenny Yeboah truthers can rejoice, because this coaching staff knows how to use tight ends as well. And if we hear positive things about either of those guys in training camps, I'd imagine the hype train's going to be chugging along, and those guys might even be able to work themselves into respectable fantasy tight ends as well. Overall, as I said, I see only good things coming from the Jets in the future. They might get out to a bit of a weak start, but with more time in the system, they should figure it out by the end of the season. And I have a bold prediction to make right now. I think this is a team that's probably going to be on like Hard Knocks or something in 2022, because they closed out this past season or this coming season as an 8-9, record, and they win 4 of their last 6 games, and the offense really starts to figure it out. And we see a similar situation to what we saw in Cleveland at the end of 2018, where Baker Mayfield was doing all his commercials and shit. I could see a similar situation with Zach Wilson and the New York Jets. All right, now we move on to the Tennessee Titans, who promoted tight ends coach Todd Downing to offensive coordinator. They obviously had their current offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith depart to take over the head coaching job in Atlanta, which Danny will talk about more tomorrow. But I'll start with the good news in Tennessee, because there's a lot less of it than there is bad news, in my opinion. The good news is that offensive coordinator Todd Downing was there the past 2 seasons, and he saw how the offense was being run. And as a tight ends coach, we saw some development from Jonnu Smith, and we've seen this guy develop players before. He saw firsthand and was part of what made Tennessee and Ryan Tannehill take that next step into becoming a vanilla offense with Marcus Mariota to a great offense the past 2 seasons. And there's a chance that Arthur Smith basically just passes Todd Downing the torch, and he just takes over this offense and not much will change. But the bad news is that this is an offense that has been one of the most efficient units in the league the last 2 years. You can see on the screen right now the metrics that they've ranked in. They're number 4 last year in the NFL in points per game, number 6 in net yards per attempt, and production premium in terms of Ryan Tannehill's play specifically has been top 3 among quarterbacks in the NFL. When you compare him to a league average situation, he has been very, very much above average, and he's played out of his mind the past 2 years. As I've talked about on the Sneaky Winners and Losers show that I did the last week, is that the Titans offense was so efficient that losing all the talent that they lost, which I already talked about, Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith, Adam Humphries, and Khalif Raymond, losing your creative and innovative play caller to a new head coaching gig is bound to raise some questions about an offense that was already overly efficient in the past. And I laughed last year. Last year, I was talking about the regression police were coming out about Ryan Tannehill and A.J. Brown prior to the season. And the reason I said it was crazy to be talking like that is because nothing changed. Everything was the same. They had the same play caller, same quarterback. Everything was set to go up, and it did. In fact, they scored more points. A.J. Brown was more productive. Ryan Tannehill was more efficient than he was last year or 2 years ago. But the play caller, the protection, weapons, everything else was the same. Why would they all of a sudden just become a bad offense like some lazy fantasy analysts were saying 2 years ago? The difference this year is that they're losing Arthur Smith as their offensive coordinator. They're losing their second target, their third target, their fifth target, and their sixth target in Corey Davis, Jonnu Smith, and Adam Humphries and Khalif Raymond. They're losing a lot of these pieces, and it's going to have an effect on A.J. Brown. It's going to have an effect on Ryan Tannehill and Derrick Henry's efficiency. How big is that effect? That's the question at hand. Can volume offset that efficiency, right? Because we're going to see most likely A.J. Brown receive more targets than he's ever received. But is it enough to offset the efficiency that he's probably going to lose? My money is on a big enough dip in efficiency that we notice it. And what I mean by this is that in 2020, The Baltimore Ravens went from an offense in 2019 that scored 33 points per game in Lamar's MVP caliber season that was best in the NFL to last year they scored 29 points per game, which was seventh in the NFL, but it felt like it was a bigger drop off than it was. It was only 4 points per game difference. But if you owned the Baltimore Ravens, pass catchers, Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson, Marquise Brown, it felt like they were a bad offense, even though they were a top 10 offense last year. And I have a feeling we could see a similar shift from the Tennessee Titans this year, where we're a little bit disappointed with A.J. Brown. We're a little bit disappointed with Derrick Henry. We're a little bit disappointed with Ryan Tannehill, even though they might still be a very good offense. And new offensive coordinator Todd Downing's coaching history isn't exactly inspiring a lot of confidence in me either. He's bounced around as a journeyman position coach, and his only stint as an offensive coordinator was with the 2017 Oakland Raiders, where they basically sputtered completely from their 2016 season, a season where Derek Carr looked like he was a franchise quarterback. Amari Cooper looked like he was a stud receiver. We saw Derek Carr's yards per attempt drop from 7.0 to 6.5 in 2017. His QBR dropped 10 points as well. And this was an offense that just was not explosive at all in 2017. And that is the only season that Todd Downing has ever been an offensive coordinator. So it's giving me a little bit of pause about Tennessee. And overall, this is my number one concern with the Titans offense, coupled with the loss of the pieces that they lost. Can we expect another 2,000 rushing yard season from Derrick Henry? Probably not. Can we expect 15 plus yards per reception and a 16% touchdown rate from A.J. Brown? Probably not. Can we expect Ryan Tannehill to be a top 10 quarterback or top 5 quarterback, even by some metrics? I don't know if we're going to see that. And my money is on no, and that this offense will likely disappoint some people with how high Derrick Henry's being drafted, with how high A.J. Brown's being drafted, and even how high Ryan Tannehill is being drafted. So that's my thoughts on the Tennessee Titans offense. They're an offense that I'm likely avoiding at their current cost. I don't think they're going to be a bad unit. I don't think they're going to take a huge step back and be a terrible offense by any means, but I do think they're going to disappoint some people if everybody's just expecting the same old Tennessee Titans the last 2 years. So that was a lot of information about those big time situations, those big time coaching changes. So I'm going to go a little bit more rapid fire on the remaining AFC coaching changes, because these weren't as big, but they were still coaching changes. So I still need to talk about them. The Miami Dolphins, they started their coaching changes by firing Chan Gailey, and they promoted their current running back coach, Eric Studesville. I'm going to call him Studesville because it's a better name. They promoted him to their run game coordinator, and George Godsey, who is their tight ends coach, they promoted him to their passing game coordinator. We don't have total clarity on who's calling plays or, what the situation is going to shake out as, but here's what we do know. There's a quick background on both of these guys. They were both with the Dolphins each of the last 2 seasons. For continuity's sake, for Tua Tagovailoa, this is helpful, knowing that the system that he was learning with Chan Gailey is not expected to change all that much because both guys were with the team in the years previous. As far as the tendencies are concerned, they ranked about league average in pass to run percentage, 58%, which ranked 18th in all situations, but they ranked about 11th in neutral situations. So a bit more pass heavy in neutral scripts. Set to be a bit more pass heavy offense. We can expect that Will Fuller and Jalen Waddle can step in, become bigger factors for Tua, because he was dealing with basically, a shell of Devontae Parker's 2019 form and Mike Gesicki as pass catchers. So at least they added to this offense, and we expect it to be a bit more of a pass heavy unit compared to what it was last year, because we know they don't really have the greatest running backs in the world, despite Myles Gaskin being able to carry a bit of a workload last year. We don't currently know who's calling plays yet, as I mentioned, but Godsey does have experience calling plays, and he's the only one who has experience calling plays. So that is who I expect to call plays. In 2015 to 2016, he was with the Texans, and he was their offensive coordinator. And the issue with drawing comparisons and any kind of tendencies that I can get from this is the fact that those offenses were bad. They were operated by terrible quarterbacks like freaking Tom Savage and a bunch of dudes that aren't even probably going to be starters in the NFL anymore, Brian Hoyer and things of that nature. And they didn't get Deshaun Watson until after Godsey was gone. So I don't really want to draw too many, comparisons for how he's going to operate the offense in Miami. I expect it to be more of the same, expect it to be much like how Chan Gailey operated his offense last year. And Tua is hopefully the big key in this, because if he's able to establish himself and take a bigger step forward in his career, that's when we're going to see this offense get a lot better. And I do think Tua is a guy that is a little bit underrated, because he's a guy that I really liked coming out of school, and he got a bum rap last year. He's coming off a hip injury, didn't have a full offseason, and it probably affected him to some degree. So just keep that in mind with the Dolphins. It's probably going to be more of the same, but they did have some, shifting of the coaching staff in that building, and it's probably going to affect them to some degree. Just the question is how much and who's calling plays is all we really need to know from here on out. So to the next team that we're going to be talking about, and that's the Pittsburgh Steelers. They promoted their quarterback coach from 2 years ago, Matt Canada, to offensive coordinator. Shout out to Matt. I'm sure he's a nice, friendly lad with a name like that. Shout out to Canada. But this is a scheme transition for the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is actually a bigger transition than a lot of people probably know if they haven't done any research about this. They are looking to move to more of a zone blocking scheme in an attempt to fix the running game's stagnant nature over the past couple of years, and especially last year when they were like the worst running game in the entire NFL. And the addition of Najee Harris in the draft makes a lot of sense for that purpose, right? They need to establish the run. They need to get their running game back on track. Coming from the Steve Sarkisian offense at Alabama, where they ran a lot of 11 personnel, a lot of spacing concepts, similar to what I talked about with Urban Meyer with the Jacksonville Jaguars section of things. Najee Harris was quoted as saying the schemes of the runs are similar to what he ran at Alabama. The inside zones, the outside zones, power concept plays, one back power, duo, all the stuff that he ran at Alabama is very similar to what he said is going to be happening in Pittsburgh. And to me, that's very interesting, knowing that Pittsburgh has been a lot more of a traditional run scheme and they haven't adopted a zone blocking approach in the past. And Najee Harris is a guy that can definitely fit that type of scheme. As he mentioned, he did it at Alabama and he did it very well. According to a lot of the research I was able to find on the Pittsburgh Steelers and Matt Canada's play calling tendencies in general, to sum up in plain language, it sounds like what Sean McVay runs, basically. A lot of window dressing, a lot of pre-snap motion, a lot of 11 personnel, a lot of zone blocking. That's the type of scheme that he's bringing to Pittsburgh. And another theme that I saw repeated over and over again is that it might be a bit of a slow start. It's going to take some time. It's going to be a gradual implementation of this new scheme. And from fantasy perspective, the way you can use that from a practical standpoint is this might lead to a bit of a slow start for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. And for the passing game, we're going to be looking at a lot more play action than what we saw before. And that should open up the deep portions of the field, which is good news for a guy like Chase Claypool. And from the quarterback's perspective, it sounds like this is a system that will take a lot of pressure off Ben Roethlisberger. And over the past couple of years, the Steelers have basically just made Ben drop back 650 times a season and do everything himself. And if this is a system, much like what Sean McVay runs, where we saw him shield the guy like Jared Goff and make life very easy on him, that's what Big Ben needs at this point in his career. And this sounds like a good thing for Big Ben and for the pass catchers. The practical fantasy advice, as I mentioned, I can offer here is that it may take a few weeks for the Steelers to get back on track, to get used to this new system. And this offense should be much more balanced than it was last year. I wouldn't expect the same number of pass attempts that they had last year. And I would also expect a more efficient and less stagnant offense after a few games. So in drafts, when you're in drafts looking at Pittsburgh Steelers players, we might be looking at some good trade targets midway through the season, but maybe not necessarily guys that you want to be drafting. So Deontay Johnson's going at a very high point right now. He's going in the 5th round. Chase Claypool is going a little bit later, so he's a little bit more of a value pick for me. But Najee Harris is a guy that's going to go early in the 2nd round, maybe even in the 1st round. At that point, you're looking at a situation where an offense might take a bit of time to get established. The offensive line, the running backs, the quarterbacks, everybody's going to need to take some time. So if you wanted to fade Najee Harris in drafts and then trade for him later in the during the season, midway through the season, that might be the smarter move, knowing that this might take a bit more time to get their legs under him. So I'm going to quickly rapid fire through these last couple just because they're a bit less changes than they were previously. But Houston Texans, they hired David Culley as the head coach. Tim Kelly is retained as the offensive coordinator. So the same guy that was the offensive coordinator last year will be the offensive coordinator this year. Quickly on David Culley, just because nobody knows anything about this guy, and you're not alone if you know nothing about him, because I was also clueless prior to doing some research about him. He's a player's coach, so hopefully we're not having a situation where he's trading away star players because he's getting into head-butting matches with them, just like Bill O'Brien was. So I wouldn't expect any kind of drama around the Houston Texans with David Culley, because he's more of a quiet, players coach. So the thing that would entice Deshaun Watson is that he's not like Bill O'Brien. So who the hell knows what Deshaun Watson's situation is, if he's going to get traded, if he's going to stay, how many games he's suspended for. We have no idea, but this is good news knowing that they hired a guy that is the opposite of Bill O'Brien, at least. And from a coaching background perspective, real quick on David Culley, he coached receivers for like 20 years under Andy Reid with the Eagles and with the Kansas City Chiefs. And he developed a lot of young receivers during that time, like Deshaun Jackson, like Jeremy Maclin, like Tyreek Hill, even towards the end of his career. So following 2016, Cully was the quarterbacks coach for Josh Allen in Buffalo from 2017 to 2018, which probably contributed to some of his development and to the quarterback that Josh Allen has become nowadays, which is like a top, 6 quarterback in the NFL. And finally, most recently, he was the passing game coordinator and the wide receivers coach in Baltimore the past 2 seasons. As I mentioned, though, Tim Kelly was retained as the offensive coordinator, and it is not expected that the offense will change very much. They passed the ball at a high rate last year because their run game and defense was atrocious. It was terrible. So whether it's Watson back there, whether it's Davis Mills or Tyrod Taylor back there, I expect this to be an offense that passes the ball a lot. How efficient are they? That will depend on who's playing quarterback probably. But Brandon Cooks still may be a guy that is undervalued as a late round flex option in this offense. But overall, I would say this is a gloomy situation for fantasy purposes, and I would just avoid it at all costs unless we know that Deshaun Watson is the full-time quarterback all season. I would just avoid this situation altogether. And then finally, we're going to close it out with the Indianapolis Colts. They promoted quarterbacks coach Marcus Brady to offensive coordinator following the departure of Nick Sirianni, who was their offensive coordinator last year. He's now the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, which Danny will get into tomorrow. But not a lot of talk because Frank Reich will still be calling the plays. We'll still have him as the play caller, so we don't really need to worry about Marcus Brady too much. But Brady was an offensive coordinator in the CFL for 7 years. During such time, his offense with the Toronto Argonauts was the most pass-heavy team in the CFL. So maybe we're underrating how much Carson Wentz is going to be valuable from a volume perspective and how much some of these pass catchers are going to be involved as well. I've already talked up Michael Pittman Jr. Knowing that they might be a bit more of a pass-heavy team than we're giving them credit for is only good news for him. And even Paris Campbell becomes a little bit more interesting as well. Most people assume that the Colts are going to be a run-heavy offense just because they have a great offensive line and because they have Jonathan Taylor. But the situation that it's playing out to be right now is that they might be a little bit more pass-heavy than we're giving them credit for. So stepping in as the new OC, Brady might be a guy that helps unlock Carson Wentz from a volume perspective a little bit. So that being said, guys, that's the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed this video, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you guys are interested in any way you can support us, you can go ahead and deposit on Underdog Fantasy. Link is in the description using code FSE. And when you do that, you'll get $25 to play with for free, only a minimum of $10. So you deposit 10, get 25 on top of that. You got a total of $35 you can use to play on the site. And as a appreciation, as a free gift for you guys, you'll get our draft guides, both of them for totally for free. When the redraft guide comes out in July, you'll get that for free. And right now you'll have the dynasty guide for free. So all you have to do, deposit on underdogfantasy.com, promo code FSE. Peace out, guys, and enjoy your Thursday.
Wire me the money.